Hello and welcome to another episode of The Messy Middle. I'm Laura Cook, your host, and today I'm excited to have Carolyn Swora on the show. Carolyn is on a mission to shift our workplaces from transactional jobs to places where people can grow, transform, and thrive while feeling energized, inspired, and motivated to do their best work. As a workplace culture architect, Carolyn works with business leaders who place their people at the core of business success to create organizational systems and practices that are people-centered, forward-thinking, and prepared for demanding and challenging business climates. Carolyn is the owner of Pinnacle Culture and has a 25-year track record helping organizations enhance the employee experience and evolve their workplace culture. She has worked with clients across various industries, ranging from small business to large corporations, and as a senior business leader in the pharmaceutical industry, leading teams through significant change. Her real-life experience is bolstered by her love of learning. She has a Master of Arts in Industrial and Organizational Psychology from Adler University in Chicago, a Human Resource Management diploma from Sheridan College, a Bachelor of Education from the University of Toronto, and a Bachelor of Kinesiology from McMaster. She is also proud to be part of the global team of independent certified Dare to Lead facilitators who are trained to bring Dare to Lead research by Brene Brown to organizations. Her podcast, PWE and Me, is now in its fourth season, is designed to inspire people at all organizational levels to create purposeful workplace experiences and close the gap between what people say should happen to transform the workplace and what is actually happening. She is also the author of Amazon bestseller, Rules of Engagement, Building a Workplace Culture to Thrive in an Uncertain World. Please help me welcome Carolyn to the show. Welcome, Carolyn. Thank you so much for joining me today in the Messy Middle.
Hey, thank you for having me, Laura.
I'm so glad that you're here to talk about emotional intelligence. We hear so much about it. Can you help explain what it means? What does it mean to be emotionally intelligent?
Well, let me first off by saying I am no expert in like the neuroscience. I consider myself a curious, like a learner to it. But to me, emotional intelligence was always something that I just had a natural, I think, affinity to. I'm very honed into others' emotions. And for any Enneagram aficionados, I am a 2, so I'm a heart type, so I can feel these emotions. So what I've come to learn what it means is really being able to balance that rational part of your brain with the emotional part of your brain. And that's probably the most like user-friendly definition that I use for it now.
So what does that look like? How does that show up? Is there an example that we could use to kind of see that working in play?
So well, I'm going to come back to this notion of being integrated, fully integrated, which, you know, we both learned about as Dare to Lead facilitators, but having a balance between our behavior, between our emotions, and between our cognition, right? And I know I grew up in a period in the workplace where you were pretty much told, leave your emotions aside. And that was hard for me. And I think there's also a gender piece that can come into play. Like, don't be a woman, right? Like, be like a man and be strong, which all of that is wrong, right? All of that is wrong. And so over the past, I'd say 10 years, especially, this notion of bringing your whole self to work has really started to become more acceptable. What does that mean, though, for many of us who, one, have learned not to bring our emotions to work or to suppress it? Or for some of us, it's just harder to get in touch with that. It's just not as developed. So what does that look like? I would say it looks like balancing your emotions with the rational thought so that you can make good decisions in the moment and not over-index on emotion and not just over-index on the straight facts. And how do you do that in a really fast-paced, moving environment that, you know, seems to change on a daily basis?
Yeah, so interesting. So it's kind of like a spectrum. On one side, you don't want to get swept away from your emotions, and on the other side, you want to be using your head and your rational mind, but there's somewhere in the middle that's your sweet spot. Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because, a big part, without getting into all the geeky brain science, but, the emotional part of our limbic system, the amygdala, we don't have control over it. So that puppy is going to like jump in and overtake whether we like to think we have control of it or not. And so if we get hooked in, so some people call it an amygdala hijack, if we get overwhelmed by emotion, our entire like prefrontal cortex, the front of our brain that does the rational, a good part of the problem solving, all those good things we need for work, that part literally shuts down if we get emotionally hijacked. So that's not good, right? At home or
Mm,
at work.
mm,
And it's going to happen. So a part of emotional intelligence as well is knowing when that does happen, being able to step away and not, take it all out on everybody else. So yeah, just kind of creating that space so that you can consciously or intentionally go back in to thinking through rationally and balancing
mm.
thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
Yeah, I like that. I was just listening to a podcast this morning, and it was talking about how if you're yelling, you cannot actually hear the other person. So
Really?
when you're heightened in that emotion,
Mm,
and if someone's yelling, you're not hearing me. It's right because you're in that space where you can't even be rational.
yep.
So
Yep.
that aligns
Absolutely.
exactly with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, so you did talk a little bit about, getting aware when it's happening, but how does the concept of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, how do those two things go hand in hand?
Yeah. Yeah. Very good question. So my belief is that self-awareness is not a destination. And for a long time, I thought, yeah, I'm self-aware. I know what's going on. And I sort of inferred that to the level of the role that I had in a big corporation. So as I
Mm,
got higher up the food chain, I was like, well, my self-awareness has to be getting bigger and bigger because I've got more people technically under me. So like wrong assumption altogether. I think as you get higher up the corporate ladder or into roles where you have more impact around people, I think you need to continue to develop your self awareness because you've got more people you're impacting, you've got more circumstances that you'll have to navigate through. So for me, self awareness is absolutely a journey.
mm,
And even when you think you are really self aware, there's going to be a whole other layer that will show itself to you. And also I've been, profoundly impacted too by the work that I'm doing within the Enneagram system, and just recognizing that whole journey of undoing my personality and realizing all the things that I hadn't seen for so many years. So that has also greatly influenced my growth and my belief around self-awareness. So how does it tie into emotional intelligence? Well, I think that it is a skill set to learn about emotions,
mm.
and not only other people's emotions, but probably most importantly, our own emotions, which I don't want to bring in another word, but I will. It's this notion of emotional literacy
Mm,
and how skilled or unskilled most of us are to be able to name an emotion when we're actually feeling it. So I think as I've learned that about myself, I mean, yes, I feel big, but I never knew how to put words on it. I just thought everybody felt that way. So I think being self aware means having a fairly, um, a growing ability to label your own emotions. And when you can label your own emotions, you're able to connect and build empathy and expand your emotional intelligence in many other ways.
mm. I
Yeah.
love that you said it's not a destination, it's a journey. And it made me think of Adam Grant's Think Again, in terms of just as when you think you've maybe had yourself figured out, something
Yeah.
else shows up that might surprise you that you have to dig into and learn about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
like that, also the concept you talked about, it was like peeling back the layers.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
I think things show themselves to you when you're ready.
yeah. Yeah.
And especially if you look at leadership in these, in these times, I mean, it is hard, 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 just with the state of the world and how fast things change. So, like, every day there's a new opportunity to learn something or a new opportunity to get hooked or triggered by emotion, right? Like, we're all knee deep in feeling a whole range of emotions, lots. And it's been so exciting to see people talk openly, and articles across big names, like big journalists and papers and such, talking about like languishing or flourishing or grief. Like, we never would have seen that 2 to 3 years ago, right? It was like, wrap your emotions up, keep them under check, don't bring them into the office. And
Mhm.
now it's like, no, we do need to acknowledge them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's one of the small blessings of this pandemic is that people have brought more of their whole lives to work, and we're seeing the whole human. So for leaders, how do self-awareness and emotional intelligence play into their role as leaders?
Yeah. Yep. Well, you and I both know that the success of any leader is going to be highly dependent on their ability to build relationships and nurture those relationships. So there to me is a very strong connection here, because if you aren't aware of your own emotions or you're not able to manage them or give yourself space to process them, you're likely going to impact others in a way, in a very unconscious, unintentional way. And I do think there are several leaders out there who don't realize their intent does not match their impact. I think they have great intent, but not really giving themselves the space to learn about emotional, intelligence. Here's just a little, it's not a pet peeve, it's just something I've noticed. When we match the word intelligence with emotion and we use the word emotional intelligence, it to me seems like a formula and something very rational. Um, so I think it's funny. It's kind of like an oxymoron bringing those two words together. And I've had this conversation with many people. I personally like to use the word emotional literacy, because I think it acknowledges the first step, which then can get us into like relationship management, which is an element of emotional intelligence. I think using that word emotional intelligence gives us permission to shut off our amygdala and just continue to hang out in the rational brain,
Hmm.
um, which which I don't think is going to serve us or help us. So I kind of got off on a bit of a tangent there, but did I answer? What was the exact question again about leaders?
Yeah, how self-awareness and emotional intelligence come into play
Right.
for leaders in their role as leaders.
Right. So yeah, if they're not in touch with their emotions, they're not going to be aware on the impact that they're having with people. I think also during times of great change or chaos or turmoil, you can also tap into the emotions of others and bring a group together.
Hmm.
So, being able to acknowledge the challenge, being able to acknowledge just the wide range of emotions that might be there for people, can bring them together and help them collectively feel like they belong and then collectively find a way forward. So that's another really important skill set for leaders today. And again, you and I both know leaders does not mean a title, right?
Right.
If you're going to be a leader, it can be anyone, that can really so-called rally the troops, but bring
Mm.
people together for a common goal.
Yeah, I like so much of what you said there. One, in terms of emotional intelligence being brought together, when we talked about the spectrum, it's like emotions over here, intelligence is over here. And so that thing in the middle is maybe what you said is the literacy. Also, what you said in terms of intent. And I remember, in my leadership journey, having been a leader where I've made a decision to serve the team without completely um, taking into account how that might show up emotionally for other people on the team. And I probably could have done some pre-work to make that decision feel better for certain individuals. And
Yes.
so it just totally, yeah, it was a light bulb moment for me.
I'm having a very similar recollection with, yeah, it was at first I thought, oh, I'm doing it all right. I've got it all figured out. And then realized, oh my gosh, I so did not look at it from that person's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was some heated exchange after, right? Myself, like I got into it as well. And that's the space, right? To be able to step back and be able to process it and like come back to that conversation when you've been able to process it a bit more. That's another important piece of emotional
Yeah.
intelligence.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think sometimes heated exchange is healthier than quiet and
Mm.
unspoken. You know, we
Yeah.
don't love heated exchange, but at least it's then out there instead of, I mean, so many times leaders make decisions where employees then go back to their desks and totally disengage,
Yeah.
um, and continue to act on until they exit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That made me think of just something else too. The fact that I think so many of us underestimate our leadership influence, right? So if we have a title, so when I was a director, yes, I had a director. So, you walk through the halls and I was aware, like, hey, if I say something in a meeting with people that aren't in my department, they're like, oh, she's a director. Like, I kind of understood that. Um, and I don't know, like, again, that's another piece of the self-awareness is recognizing the power that your title carries and knowing that that means you have to do a little bit of extra emotional intelligence work
Mm,
because you are going to have an accountability to bring this group together, and that's different, and you can't absolve that. You cannot absolve that. So I think that's one piece of it. And then for people who don't have a leader, sort of like a formal leadership role, don't shirk away from the opportunity to use your emotional intelligence to bring people together to get through conversations or acknowledge things that are being unspoken.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think absolutely that's one of the main, and I mean, when we use the term leader, it's anyone who's ready to step into that.
Yeah.
It's not a title. And I think exactly that one of the most important things for leaders to do right now is to speak the unspoken.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So great. We know what it is now. What can we do? Maybe we'll separate the two. So, what can we do as leaders to increase our self awareness?
Yeah. Well, first step is to know that there's always going to be something more to to learn about ourselves. I'd say is one thing. Um, I am a huge fan. I've become a huge fan because of one of my friends of journaling.
Hmm.
And I used to think that it was not my thing and for writers and for creatives. Um, and now I'm realizing it is a fantastic way to process things. So that would be one piece that I would strongly recommend. And hey, if I could do it, like I literally wouldn't do journaling because I thought, well, if anybody ever picks it up one day, I don't know why I thought I was going to have a book published, like the Diary of Anne Frank, but like the Diary of Carolyn. So I always was worried about writing the right way. And what I've learned through my friend Steph is no, you just, she's taught me, she's given me some journal prompts to get me going. And now I have no problem. I actually journal once or twice a day. But it's a phenomenal way to process, just to
Mm,
process what's going on, to help you again just hone those skills of self-observation. What did you notice about yourself today? What did you notice about others? And just those two prompts alone, if you give yourself the space, you'll be surprised what comes out of your writing utensil. And you could probably do it orally too, using apps if you don't want to write. I think writing, actually, there's something about the processing if you can write, to actually write it. So that would be the first thing
yeah.
to help with self-awareness. And the second thing is just grab a feelings wheel, get an app, just something to start helping you identify what you're feeling. So,
What's a feelings wheel?
it's it's just a wheel that has a bunch of words that describes how you're feeling. And it helps us, it's a tool that can help us expand our emotional vocabulary. So most of us, can do the happy, what is it? Happy, mad, glad, sad. Um, But if we can expand our vocabulary beyond those 4 words, we can capture nuances and more details about what we're actually feeling. So I think those 2 are awesome ways to start. You don't need a coach to do that. You don't need to make a huge investment. Grab a journal and just write.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when I started journaling early in my career, it felt very self-indulgent. And
Really?
so I felt like it was being like giving myself permission to just sit in those messy emotions, and it was self-indulgent. But now, when I look back at what I wrote, I am so grateful that I have those insights that I can revisit and that I can just remember my journey. So it may feel weird in the moment, but it's going to be such a rich treasure to discover later on.
Yeah. And I think, for me, my learning I just so was not integrated, right? If we come back to those 3 stools, feeling, cognition, and behavior, I was living off of 2 stools, and the missing piece, or the missing leg, not 2 stools, 2 legs. The missing leg was emotions. I was feeling them, but I was not processing them at all.
Mm.
And that showed up, like, that impacted how I led. I was an overly emotional leader, like, absolutely.
Interesting.
So, could I know I could have learned to balance that better, for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
So I think the journaling piece speaks to what we can do to build our self awareness. And then around the emotional intelligence piece, you mentioned the feelings wheel. And sorry, what was the other thing you mentioned?
Well, yeah, the feelings wheels is to help with your emotional literacy, right? So
Yeah.
self-awareness is actually a piece of emotional intelligence, right? If we look at Daniel Goleman's 4 things. Um, so so self-awareness, the journaling, and then the emotion wheel. I'd say the last piece is like relationship management. So, like, how you process these things and how you relate it to others. I would, again, look at the groups that you are a part of. How is it that you build and manage your relationships? And just, again, bring some awareness and intention to that, because we all do it differently. And I don't think there's any one right way to say to say how to build or nurture a relationship. I think we're all going to do that in our own unique ways. However, we want to do it with intention, and we want to do it with awareness. So
Mm.
I think reflecting on those groups that you are a part of, and how do you show up? How do you influence? Again, just paying attention to it so that you are intentional versus reactionary.
Yeah. And I think another good practice is to start trying to name the emotion that you're seeing in others and checking if you're getting
Yes.
it right, right? Or even
Yeah.
just asking, how are you feeling about that?
Yep.
Yeah. Is there anything else around emotional intelligence or self awareness that you would like our audience to know or think
I
about?
I think those 2 things are juicy and beefy enough. And even, yeah, just working on those 2 things. I'll share, like, there's a few books that have been really profoundly, like, had a big profound impact on me. So Emotional Agility by Susan David was
Mm,
one, and Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett was another one. Both
great.
researchers, and what I love about this area of work now is there's so much evidence to support how this happens, that it's not just a light and fluffy thing. So those 2 books, that could be another thing, is just read about some of this research that's being done, and find a way that feels good for you to make it part of your learning and development as a leader.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll link to those two books as well as any of the other resources we mentioned in the show notes for
Yeah.
people to
And
figure
they
out.
both had, by the way, and I know they both had great podcasts with Brene. I read both their books before. Like, they both had a big impact on me. I just love the way they were written and the research behind it.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're good to go into the closing questions that I like to ask all of my guests. If there's nothing else you'd like to add.
No, I think we're good.
Okay, good. So, what do you think is the most important thing for leaders to know or do right now?
well, it's going to be no surprise based on what we've just talked about. I think the most important thing leaders can do right now is increase their own emotional literacy and just get connected to how they're feeling. We have this shared experience globally that no one is immune to. And I think that if we can get in touch with our own feelings, it's going to allow us to connect to others. So I'm not saying you have to go out and share it with everybody and broadcast it on social media, but just get connected with how you are truly feeling. And you don't need to be like always happy. It doesn't always have to be pretty. Just learn to connect to what you're feeling so you can use that in balance with that other great problem solving piece of your brain.
Yeah, I like that. And I think one small thing we can do right now to practice this is even like in your next meeting, when someone says, "How are you doing?" instead of defaulting to fine, check in and like maybe
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I'm feeling a little frustrated," or "This is feeling, I'm starting to feel like this will never end," or whatever
Yeah.
it is that you're experiencing. To name it, it encourages other people to do that too, right?
Yeah. And give people something that I'll do for several types of engagements that I facilitate is at the beginning of a meeting or at the end of the meeting, what's one word to describe how you're feeling right now?
Mhm.
And making it clear that it doesn't need to be a positive word. So that has been really helpful. A simple action like that can just that's all it needs to be. You don't need to try and fix it for people. Just give them the space to just be themselves and acknowledge it.
Yeah, I really do like that practice as well. Thank
Yeah.
you. So I've heard that you've taken up journaling per our
Yes.
earlier discussion, but what other self-care practices are currently bringing you balance? Is there a self-care practice that you have right now that you'd recommend?
Yeah, and it's getting out and walking my dog, which seems
Mm.
so simple. In fact, he probably just heard that word and his ears went up. But if I have 15 minutes extra in between meetings, instead of sitting and trying to hammer out, another email, I'll just grab Bear and we'll go out for a walk around the block. Um,
Nice.
so looking at that self-care practice of movement, not as a big hour and a half or like going to the gym. I can't go to the gym right now because it's closed, but looking at it in smaller little touch points throughout the day, that's been a big shift for me. Really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And you don't, like you said, you don't have to commit a whole amount of time to it. It could be
No.
15 minutes and get outside. I
Yeah.
love that.
Even when I'm facilitating sometimes and we've got like a 10-minute break,
Yeah.
I'll like run out and we'll just do a quick run around the block and just trying to be present with like birds or squirrels or just like trying to find that moment. And I can't even believe if anyone's listening to this and they know me, they're like, "Oh my gosh, Carolyn, what has happened to you?" Self-care has happened to me. So yeah,
So the Carolyn of years ago would never have said that.
never, never, never.
That's good. My last question is to help share wisdom. So I feel like I currently have three business or personal development books on my desk waiting to be read. And I just simply don't have the time to read all the books that I'd love to read. So
Right.
what are you digging into right now? And can you give me either the Coles Notes version or like one key takeaway based on what
Yeah.
you're reading?
I've already shared Emotional Agility by Susan David. I think that should be standard reading for anybody who is trying to live right now, to be honest. And I talked a little bit about it before, but she's an emotions researcher. I can't remember what school she's out of. And so she has really provided clarity on steps and signposts on how you can use emotions as data. So I love that. I love her work. I quote it all the time. So that would be one. Um, what's another? I do read a lot and I'm into a whole bunch of different things. Um, I shared Mark Brackett. Who Do You Want to Be by Margaret Wheatley was another really interesting one. It's a little bit deep, not necessarily something everyone would really gravitate to, but she's a pretty interesting individual. She's done a lot of work in the organizational development space. She also has a very deep sort of spiritual side. So that would be another one. And then, of course, The 9 Types of Leadership by Beatrice Chestnut. So I think that there's some great insight in there to understand personality types and how they show up in leadership. So those would be them.
Great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all of the questions I had for you today. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think anyone out there who is taking on a leadership role, good on you. It's the hardest thing you have to do at home or at work in your community. And just stick with it. Keep your head up. Know that, you're gonna not get it perfect, and then that's okay. And one day you'll look back and realize all those lessons you're learning along the way are gonna make you into a better leader down the road.
Yeah, well said. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thanks, Laura.